All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Independent Podcast. I'm your host, Fernando Garcia, and I'm here with Agustin Valadez. Agustin is a licensed marriage and family therapist here in San Diego. He's also a very dear friend of mine, and I brought him on the show today because I wanted to talk about mental health. You're welcome. Mental health here in our country. Also talk about some other issues. He has a very interesting backstory. So Agustin, there's a lot of things I already know about you, but there's a lot of people watching who don't. Will you tell us a little bit about your backstory, where you're born, where you're raised, the trajectory that got you to becoming a therapist?
Okay. Wow, that's a great question. And how long do you think the podcast is?
Probably like 45 minutes.
All right, so I'll keep it short, and I'll start with, and I think part of probably we'll be touching on some of these things later on, but where I began, so my idea of what I wanted to do for my future in my life, it's not where I ended up.
Okay.
And it has a lot to do with some of the things we're going to be touching on as far as like culture identification, what it is to be an immigrant here in the United States. I'm first generation American. I was born in the United States, but I didn't grow up in the United States. So let me tell you how that happened.
Yeah, how did that happen?
My grandparents and my parents were well off enough and living in central Mexico. They had maquiladoras and other clothing, companies that they wanted to, bring up and have a successful business for the family. They decided to move to Tijuana. And then, of course, you started the process of doing cross-border trade and all of those things. In that process, something happened. The story here is still murky for the family, and I only have parts of it. Which, I mean, for the purpose of this, it's the things did not work out for my family the way that they expected. They did come into the U.S. and start doing some trade, but at some point, they lost the company. My parents were living in Los Angeles at the time, and that's where I was born. I was born in Los Angeles, and at the age of 2, I have at that time it was just my older sister and I. At that time, my father decided to move us back to Mexico. To live in Mexico. So we lived in Playas de Tijuana is where we moved us. And that's where I grew up for the first 13 years of my life. Went to the schools, lived the life that is more typical of living in the country, the Mexican family, the neighborhood, the customs and the things you observe. Even though it's a border town, we had very limited connection to what lifestyle in the United States was. When we came over to visit, we would spend time with family that also lived in little enclaves within either San Diego or Los Angeles area that were very much like being in Mexico. Hardly anybody spoke English. All the traditions were observed. So you're around. It's almost like you just know you're in a different country. You're a child at this time. And you notice some differences. But it's really not kind of capturing really what it is because you're comfortable in where you're at. So, fast forward to probably age 13. And my father really now wanted us to start getting the connection to American education. He wanted us to grow up in Mexico and in a big part to really understand our culture, our roots, to learn Spanish, to be able to command it in a way that he felt was, representative of our culture, which we fought against him for many years over that. But I'm older now and I understand it for what it is. But then we started coming across the border for school. Age 13, 14, it was a difficult transition. And this is where the challenges for me as far as identifying as American or Mexican. I'm an American citizen. I was born in the United States. I haven't lived here for many years, but now I'm here. And I'm arriving to a country where now I do have to look more at what it is to be in this country. And I can safely tell you that when I thought about Americans, I did not think about the variety that I now know to be Americans. I thought America is white, Anglo, Caucasian people, all over the place. They're going to be all over. But that was not my reality. And coming into the neighborhood that I came into and I went to Southwest Junior High School.
Okay.
Where there I found that the majority of the students, I would say a good 75%, were Hispanic, Latino, Mexican, Asian. We had
probably like Filipinos,
African Americans.
Yeah.
So it was a shock to me to realize that these people also consider themselves Americans.
Yeah.
It was also a shock to me to realize that I was not accepted by the first generation Mexicans that actually were born here and grew up here.
Yeah.
Though I was born here, like I mentioned, I didn't grow up here. And spending time here and then going back to Playas, I started getting a lot of flack from even people that I grew up with for a long time.
For moving back over
For
here?
moving over here, and then but perception, and we've talked about how perception drives action.
Right.
Their perception of me was that I thought I was better than them and that I was an American, a true American now.
Yeah.
So I was in that really interesting middle ground.
Yeah.
Not really identifying. That's where my journey began.
Okay.
To looking at family dynamics, and the understanding then wasn't what it is now, and not even close. Yeah. But that's what I attribute to me starting to explore psychology in a very sort of like offhand way at that time.
Yeah.
Wanting to understand the dynamics of why people treated each other the way that they did was interesting to me. The journey to me learning English had a lot to do with that.
Okay.
And I don't know if I've shared this.
No, I don't think you have. I was gonna ask you, how did you learn English? Yeah.
So the beginning of it, the roots of it was through television. Like a lot of border towns and the kids existing and living in those towns, they learn English through watching cartoons. So, but I spoke cartoon English, which wasn't good enough for what I needed. I was in ESL classes. I started picking up the language. I had a lot of conflict with the way that people treated me and talked to me, and I fought back. I would get in trouble quite a bit. And at the time, and this is where this began. So I'm looking at the dynamics. I'm looking at the differences in the people, how I'm being treated. This is with the idea of like, what's happening, what's going on. My family doesn't understand me when I try to share this with them, the challenge. But just go and do. Or if they do this to you, well, you do this to them and assert yourself in that way. Yeah. Well, I did, and I got in trouble. Yeah. My thought was the reason that I got in trouble and could not get out of it was because I didn't speak the language well enough. Right? And not knowing really the intricacies of the language and hearing white students also act in a way where I was getting in trouble. But it seemed to me, now I don't know, to this day I can't assert whether they got in trouble or not, but it seemed to me that they didn't. They seemed confident and assertive because they were speaking the same language the teachers were speaking. So at that moment, it's almost like this idea came to me, I want to learn to speak English like white people. Okay. And that's the thought, and I don't mind sharing it now because at that time I had very limited concept of racism, prejudice, and all this, which I'll tell you, I did not know when I lived in Mexico, and I very quickly learned it in this country, which I don't know, that's a whole nother podcast. I was quickly indoctrinated into what those things meant. And that's what got me on the journey of learning how to speak like a white person. I laugh at it now because it's, even after I started speaking English a lot better, I still got in trouble. Okay. And then I realized, well, it's not the fact that I can't defend myself or talk my way out of things. It's just, I'm doing things that I shouldn't be doing.
It's not the language. It's
not the language. It was my behavior, and it was purely my behavior. My attitude that was born out of my life experience, things that I had gone through, which, that could be a longer conversation, but we're going to touch on this. It's the trauma experiences you have in childhood that are unprocessed.
I think it's sometimes hard for, especially immigrant parents, to understand because from their perspective, it's like, you're not starving, you got clothes, you got a home. What are you complaining about? Right. Yes. You're being a brat, kind of like you're kind of being spoiled because you're just mad that you can't pick this language up, or so they don't quite understand the feelings, and obviously as a child you're seeing things from a different perspective. Just like, somebody now says, oh, I wanted to try to talk white, that some people are going to find that offensive, but as a child,
Right.
that's your world. That's how you viewed it.
It made sense.
And it made sense. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So yeah, continue. So you started to see, you have this, just dynamic of how people, and I've experienced the same thing because I have a kind of a little bit of a different perception because I was, I was born here, raised here, up in LA, grew up in a good neighborhood, but everybody in my neighborhood, I grew up in a good neighborhood with not a lot of, I'd probably say 25 to 30% were white people. The other ones were minorities, Asians, Hispanics, Blacks. And so it just, and we all pretty much spoke English. A lot of people did speak a second language, but not everybody. And we just kind of grew up, thinking that was normal. I didn't realize I never thought there were so many white people in America until I came to San Diego, went to San Diego State. That was my first, that's when I realized, wow, there's actually white people. I didn't realize that.
So there's that difference.
There's a big difference.
For you and me, because I had an expectation
that
that's all I would find. Because you watch at that time you're watching the majority of the TV programs we were watching. It was blonde, blue-eyed people all over the place. Very limited programming that honored other cultures that were present here at that time. So
and sometimes growing up though, I wouldn't say mainly growing up, but maybe as an adult, there are people out there that will make you feel like you're not Mexican enough because of your Spanish, or because you were raised here, because of and everybody has their little quirk about it, and which is so interesting because I've noticed that people who are like that, people who really want to nitpick at other people because of where they were from or their accent or what they know or don't know, sometimes it's something deep down inside of them. Because I've noticed people who are confident in themselves, who have a certain level of understanding and empathy, they're not that way. They're very understanding. They're very, it's not a big deal for them. They really want to get to know the person, not really they want to know the inner side and understand the inner side as opposed to the outer side, where they grew up, how they talk. But then again, that's
right. Our behavior and how we speak, whatever it be, with an accent or not, or that come out of the language, just that's a vehicle for us to externalize who we are as an individual, which I find beauty in all of it. Zero judgment, which is part of what, sort of like in being a therapist, my approach to my work, it's truly this, what we call unconditional positive regard, right? Is that whatever you bring, whatever you bring to me as a person, as a client in therapy, I accept it for what you're bringing. Yeah. So I don't judge it as saying, well, I think you're lying to me, or be offended by it. Yeah. Because my purpose is, if it's an individual outside of my profession and the work that I do, I really do want to get to know you. If I don't want to get to know you and you act in a certain way that I just don't like, well, I just won't engage with you. Yeah. But if you're coming to therapy and that's a purpose, I want to know the most genuine version of you. And I want to provide the space where in time, you will feel that is the space for you to be able to do that. Yeah. So you let down the guard and you start sharing more about your inner self, rather than some of the masks that we put on to present to other people. Wow. Yeah.
How was your experience in high school? So where'd you go to high school?
So I went to, like I said, Southwest Junior High School. They're called middle schools. Junior high school. And I went to Southwest High School for a little while, maybe like half a year, a year. My older sister and I, Daisy, which I love her so much. She actually failed a grade so we could stay together. Oh wow! In elementary school while we were in Mexico. Oh yeah. So we stayed together. She was a grade ahead of me in school, and we ended up together in the same grade as we came to school here in the States. But at some point in high school, so our differences were just more glaring. Yeah. She had her group, I had my group, and she actually left Southwest High School and left me by myself, which, you know, I felt a little hurt. I felt a little hurt at that time, and I'm a little lost. Oh my God.
Okay.
We had been together since first grade.
Wow.
Right. So she went to Chula Vista High School, and soon after I followed.
Okay.
To Chula Vista High School.
Yeah.
She had a falling out with her friends at Chula Vista High School, so she went back to Southwest to finish off, and that's what she finished off.
Okay.
I stayed. I'm like, I'm done. I was in a different place at that time. So I graduated from Chula Vista High School, class of '86. You know, I say the best class ever. It's right smack in the middle of the '80s.
Yeah. It was great time. Great music, great cars.
Era, a lot of great things around that time.
Yeah.
This is another interesting period of my life. I wanted to fit in the way that I saw what I considered American kids to fit in. You know, they got involved in clubs, they got involved in sports. You know, their integration seemed to me seamless.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I knew nothing about their lives and what they were going through. And I tried those things, and I failed at a lot of them.
Yeah.
One thing that I didn't fail at and I was real good at is not being good. Getting in trouble, ditching, you know, getting in fights. And I found people that accepted that part of me. And I created a clique and a group, and we did, you know, we were teenagers. We did things that, you know, we shouldn't have been doing, getting in trouble, but then realizing I'm failing most of my classes. Right. And it wasn't because I wasn't intelligent enough, that's another part of my initial childhood sort of trauma experience that I had, is that the way that I was treated as a child by quite a few people was that I wasn't intelligent. I wasn't the smart one in the family. Not only in my nuclear family, but the extended family, kind of the cousins. Okay. Right? Yeah. And it was because I was quieter. I was more timid at that time, you know. But I carried that with me. So when I started failing, I started attributing that to me not being intelligent enough, not being capable. I don't have what it takes to succeed at these things that I've tried, like sports, clubs, school. So then I started working. I tell people that I started working at age 12, which I did in Mexico. We would go do odd jobs. Yeah. I remember a friend of mine from church, because we also grew up in a very religious household. We would take a bus ride for 3 hours in TJ to get to this industrial park. One of the deacons of the church worked there. Yeah. He gave us his job. We were when we came down to figure out what the exchange was, we were working for pennies. Oh, really? And we were like, forget this. Yeah, but then we went, you know, we found other work. Yeah. And so that idea started getting ingrained, because that's when my parents sort of were like, as long as you find a good job and you work hard, get married, have a family, provide for your family, that's a trap. Yeah. So I'm falling back on that, even though I was exposed to something else for a few years. Now, think about this. I've only had a couple of years from the time that I actually came here to start studying in high school. So I'm 13, 14, 15. Yeah. Right? It's not very long to systems. Yeah. So I was trying to integrate into all of that, but falling back into things that are familiar and even in dysfunction are comfortable because it's what you know for so long. I started falling back to those negative ideals of, you know, I'm not, why even try? So I started working. I was working as Bob's Big Boy. I remember Bob's Big Boy. I think there's one now in the whole U.S. I started as a dishwasher, getting paid under the table because I wasn't old enough to work. Wow. Eventually moved up to short order cook, which I loved doing that work. And then I started working at Merry-Go-Round. I don't know if you remember Merry-Go-Round. It was a clothing factory. Chess King was another one that was kind of similar. Oh, wow. Yeah. A lot of cool clothes. Yeah. Anyway. You're dating yourself. Yeah, definitely. I did say class of 86. Yeah. I'm okay with that. But that's a mentality that I have. Yeah. Until I ran into this church member, this Puerto Rican guy, who was a recruiter, an army recruiter. Yeah. And he really started hyping the army up. Okay. He really got me. Yeah. To kind of really interested in it and focused in it. But if you don't have a high school diploma, you can't join.
Yeah.
And something clicked.
Yeah.
Hindsight being what it is, I try to really connect to what clicked. And the only thing that I can come up with that makes sense now, and looking back, is that it was an opportunity for me to get out of this place.
Yeah.
And go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And figure out, could things be better for me? Which is another thing that I love talking about in therapy, is that at times we think that replacing one place for another, or one person for another, like in relationships, friendships, is going to be what changes things for us, which it doesn't work that way. Those things can be helpful, and we can talk about this a little bit more later, but that is not what's going to create change.
What is it that creates change then?
It's action of the individual, which begins from self-assessment, which is the toughest things to do, is really look at ourselves and acknowledge a lot of things about us that are not working well for us, and then take steps to do something different. Some replacement behaviors that are not what we're doing now. It's almost like that idea of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And that's where a lot of people connect with this idea of, well, like, I hate this place, I hate the people here. If I'm thinking of moving here and everything's going to be better. Maybe. I say maybe because I don't know. I don't have like this crystal ball. But what I can tell you is that wherever you go, the one thing that's a constant and the variable that never changes is you. You and the way you approach life, the way you see yourself, the way you see other people, the way you see the world, is not going to change just because you went somewhere else, right? So it has to begin with the self. Which I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead, but
that's perfect.
One of the concepts that I try to link whatever I've done in my life. I was in the military, which I was getting close to talking about that, but concepts from working in the military and then working at UPS for many years. Sort of that was my jumping point to trying to get back to school at that time and support my family, which at that time my wife and my child was just born in '94. So some of the things that I've learned, I've taken with me and I've applied them to the work that I do now. The military, and you can look this up, and you can Google 11 principles of military leadership. Right? And a list of 11 things comes up. And you can look at them and read them, and they sound, you can say, militaristic. They do. If you read them just by the words that are being used to describe the things. But if you sort of take in the concept of what they're talking about, they can be generalized to our life in anything that you do. One of the ones that always sticks with me is know yourself and seek self-improvement. That's one of the principles of military leadership. That's one of the principles, to me, of living the life as a human being in general.
Absolutely.
Right? But for a long time, I looked at my time in the military because I didn't stay as long as some of my friends did when they retired. I left. I was in the military for 8 years. I felt like now these things are useless. There's a lot of things. I was a communication specialist. I did radio and satellite and SATCOM work. As a matter of fact, when I first started, we were still using teletypes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And because I took a typing class in high school, they said, oh, this person, you'll be really good at it. Which I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The life expectancy of that MOS 31 Charlie communications out in war situations is down to seconds.
Oh, wow.
Right, because you're sending, you're transmitting signals that can be traced back to a location.
Oh, wow.
So
they're going to get you first.
They don't tell you what if you're trying to interfere with the movement, of a combat group, is you disable their communications. Right. So anyway, they didn't tell me that it wasn't in the brochure. My girl,
Yeah.
not my recruiter didn't tell me that.
Yeah.
As much as he said he cared about me.
Are you glad you met your recruiter?
I am.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I would say things like, I wish you would have spoke differently about the experience. I wish you would have done that. The thing is, once you're in something, you either do it or you get out.
Yeah.
The reasons why we stay in things
Yeah.
have a lot to do with the choices that we make. And the view often is that we don't have another choice. Well, why are you still doing this? Why are you still, oh, I have no choice. I have to. Well, there's no real have to about really anything.
Yeah.
It's a choice that you make because the consequences of other choices in front of us are things that we don't want for us,
Right.
which is fine. So this is a part where, as a therapist, that's where you carry that empathy for the person, even sympathy at times if you've been through similar situations, where you understand how people get stuck in the places they get stuck.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I might have.
No, that's perfect. I'm glad. A lot of people don't talk about that. I mean, you're saying that, a lot of people feel like I have to do this. I don't have a choice. And you're right. The reality is, well, you do have a choice. The other choices may not be what you want.
Right.
And so understanding that maybe where you're at would you say sometimes it is the best situation, or is it, and being okay with that, or understanding where you're at, maybe looking for other choices, maybe opening the door to some other things.
Yeah, we're getting deep here. Maybe we should start charging hours. So this is a lot of therapists may not agree with this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of us in the field that do, and since we operate from different modalities, sometimes that kind of interferes with this idea. Is that the work that I do? I really try to stay away from qualifying things too much, like good, bad, best, worst. Because what I like to teach my clients is to be present in the moment and understand the situation that they're in, and understand what benefit they're getting out of where they are, because there is a benefit.
Yeah.
I work a lot with doing cost benefit analysis with my clients.
Yeah.
Which at times, in the initial stages of doing a cost benefit analysis, one of the first things that we run into where the clients are like, what are you talking about there being benefit to negative behavior?
Yeah.
Because we tend to listen to the word benefit and then we connect it to something good.
Yeah.
Right? The benefits to eating a healthy breakfast are
X, Y, and Z, yeah.
Right. So what are the benefits of eating an unhealthy breakfast?
Tastes good.
You can eat whatever you want. That's a benefit.
Yeah.
I don't have to eat the eggs with the fruit and the yogurt.
Pancakes.
I can have
syrup.
I can have whatever I want.
Yeah.
Well, there are consequences to that.
Yeah.
Right. There are consequences to that, but there is a benefit.
Yeah.
With the high school kids, I work a lot in high schools and middle schools as a therapist in my initial stages of work, and I would do cost benefit analysis with them often. And they would be like, what do you mean there's a benefit to ditching? I'm like, well, what is the benefit? What do you get out of it? That is the benefit, right? That you're getting something out. Well, I get to go to the beach, spend time with my friends, right? So we're kind of put these things writing in that list. Yeah. So what's the cost of ditching?
Yeah.
Right? I get in trouble with my parents, get in trouble at school, I get lousy grades, I
can't play sports or whatever.
Right, if they're in some type of sport that requires them to have certain grades. So when you start working, and I'm not saying that once that realization comes into existence and understanding for the person, that's what creates change.
Yeah.
That's where the work begins, because those are the tough things to really let go of.
Yeah.
Right, and then the work goes further into figuring out what maintains that behavior. Yeah. What makes it so challenging for us to let go of certain things and get stuck in certain places. So at times where you are for the moment, maybe it is the best way, but can you look at the benefits you're getting out of it? Yeah. This is a concept out of dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, is being mindfully present and radically accepting where you are. as a concept of this is where I am and this is what's happening. This is not who I am. This does not define my existence, and this is not who I'm going to be forever.
Right.
But this is real.
Yeah.
I am struggling financially. I am struggling emotionally. These things are happening in my family. Whatever it is that you're going through.
Yeah.
I don't like it, and I want to get out of here. I want to move through this, forward, past it. Right? Staying in avoidance, which we do quite often as human beings. Right? We use a lot of distractors, which
like going out or do whatever. It could
Right.
be a range of things.
and distractors are good. There's a benefit to distractors as long as it's not sort of the sole thing that you're using to try to resolve the things you're going through.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, look at addiction.
Yeah.
Alcohol and drug addiction, right?
Yeah.
If that becomes your sort of your way of dealing with problems, well, that in itself brings a host of other issues.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you probably think is there as a therapist? Well, I'm gonna stay on one thing that you had talked about is you had worked with kids in like middle school and high school.
Mm-hmm.
Would you think it would be a good idea? I mean, just because there's a lot of things with like mass shootings and kids coming back to high school and shooting up their schools. Do you think it's a good idea? So for every student to maybe before they go into high school to sit down with their therapist, whether they need it or not, just to normalize that the act of sitting with the therapist, and also just giving them the idea that, hey, if you're looks like everything's going good, grades are good, but if you ever need help, things are getting bad. There are places, there's somebody that you can go to, so that things don't get out of hand. Do you think that would help, or is that even out there already? It's been a while since I've been in high school.
There are some things in place in that line.
Yeah.
But this is one of the things that really I think needs to happen as far as being in a therapeutic relationship, is that the person that's needing the help has to want to be there.
Yeah.
And I say this wholeheartedly, and I believe it strongly, because of the experiences that I've had growing up, and the experience that I've had in working with children and adolescents in the beginning of my work as a therapist. I existed and I grew up in county programs, which I'm so glad the county has the funding, whether it be state, federal, whatever it may be. But there's companies out there that create these programs that are funded by the government that have very strict guidelines, which because there's accountability for reporting, and so the money can keep coming.
Right.
But at times it creates a situation in the way you provide the services, where the people that are coming to receive your services are not necessarily people that want to receive your services. Now, and I'm speaking specifically to children's programs, because I saw this firsthand. We often refer to our clients as involuntary clients, right? They were being brought to us either by the parents or the schools because they had done something wrong. Yeah. So already the beginning of this experience for them was out of something they had done that they weren't supposed to do.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to be there. Involuntary clients. Yeah. It was a really nuanced approach to do this work in trying to show these children and these adolescents that you were there to help.
Yeah.
And it took some time.
Yeah.
So I think having the availability, I think speaking openly about mental health. I know I work with a couple of schools that as I was leaving the county programs, we were working on things like creating groups that were student run that have to do with mental health. And I participated in a few of those as a speaker for them. They were posting things on Instagram. That's where I saw the most success, where it was a student driven. So it's from the top down. You work with the adults, you work with the staff, you work with the teachers, which that's a whole nother conversation. That was incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
2 points of view as
Yeah.
for therapists to teach and what they want their students to do. But if you have that availability,
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far away from the question. We start with the adults. We start educating the adults, the parents, the staff, and the way that they speak to these things. And so again, and this goes to another concept of therapy that's incredibly important, is that, and we're talking about what you do from early stages of development is modeling behavior. So the behavior and the actions that you take speak volumes.
Mm.
They speak way louder than the things you tell children or adolescents to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
for a long time it's been do as I say.
Yeah. Not as I
Right.
do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But it's the opposite.
You can say that, and people have been saying that, and they're probably still saying that now. But if they're seeing you engage in different behaviors, right, that in some way, truncated or not, resolve issues in the moment, that sticks in the brain more as a resolution than what you're actually trying to teach them with other words, like be kind, be nice, say please, thank you, I'm sorry. But if you're not doing it, if when you speak of mental health, you speak of it as something that only crazy people do.
Yeah.
Or that you have to be really affected or damaged to go to therapy.
Yeah.
We normalize it in the way that that we normalize our physical health.
Yeah.
If you have a broken arm,
Yeah.
and your buddies or your parents are making fun, oh, look at you, oh,
Yeah.
look at the little wimpy guy with a broken arm. Is that going to stop you from going to the hospital? Well,
Could.
it could, right?
Yeah.
But most people are not going to do that.
Yeah.
Most people, you have a broken arm, you have an illness.
Yeah.
What do? You go to the emergency room, you make an appointment with your doctor, and you
Yeah.
go, because that's what's normal.
But with mental health wounds, you can't really see them.
Right. So that's
Yeah.
one thing. You can readily see them, and a lot of people have. I mean, me included. We create these masks, things that keep us balanced, and we try to show our best selves, and sometimes as best as we can at the time for what we're going through.
Yeah.
And we walk through life with these injuries that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
That really do affect our functioning. You'll eventually get to a point where you can't maintain anymore, and that's when you see those kind of ruptures happen and things explode. I didn't bring any statistics because I think at this point we know how high the incidences of suicide are.
Yeah.
Right. The incidence of physical violence, that it seems to be rampant. People acting out from that emotional part of them because they have no other way, or in that moment it seems like they have no other way to deal with things.
Yeah.
The mass shootings that you were speaking to earlier, we're seeing all these different things. I think, in my opinion, these things have been around for a long time. But in my opinion, the way that COVID happened, it disrupted that sort of track that people were on blocking a lot of things out and living purely with distractors. Yeah. Work, 16, 18-hour work days, other distractors, some activities, maybe drinking, drugs,
a lot of drinking,
parties.
So
So you're living this life, and then COVID happens, and then we get locked down. Mm-hmm. So now you don't exist, and you have zero access to your distractors. Yeah. Now you're living with the people that you see. Yeah. That you have seen for years, but you really haven't seen them. Yeah. You've seen them for moments in time throughout your day. Yeah. Like, think about that. But now you're living with them, and now not only do you have to manage how you individually are experiencing and not having access to all these things, right? You also, the people that you normally go to for support, or you would hopefully go to for support, which is the adults in your life, are also going through a very similar thing, where all of the things that they use to manage their life are not gone. Yeah. Right? So I think,
Yeah, I think.
oh, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think one of the topics I did want to talk about was the effects of COVID on mental health and on people's mental health in general. And because I think you're right, it was just such a disruptor
Mhm.
on whatever your plan was, and then boom,
Yeah.
your plan's done, at least for a while. Then you got, and now you're living this new life, and like you said, hanging out with people that you've always lived with but never really lived with.
Yeah.
I
mean, to that and a lot of people in the field sort of refer to it as COVID making things worse. In my opinion, the way I see things, I think COVID just brought a lot of things to light that were already there.
Yeah.
So it was like the curtain was pulled over, and we saw, the wizard.
Right.
Am I dating myself?
Yeah, no.
Wizard of Oz reference. We saw the inner workings of this frail system.
Yeah.
And we could see all the little things that we did to keep ourselves together.
Yeah.
And now they're gone.
Yeah.
So, and you're also existing in this with maybe little to no arsenal in your skill set to manage these things.
Yeah.
You don't have the tools, you don't have the weapons to combat what's happening.
Yeah. Do you think that one of the problems we have, do you think there's overprescribing of medications in mental health?
This should be a separate podcast. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The simple answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Medications mask things. They don't get at the root what's happening.
Yeah.
A lot of the work that I do has to do with trauma.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm certified in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which deals directly with trauma. So the beginnings of this modality of therapy was working with what we consider trauma, working with first responders, military, PTSD, people suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah. People who had experienced what you would look at as a very overtly traumatic experience.
Okay.
But what was discovered, and I won't go too deep into this, but what was discovered in working with these people is, you have to take a history. So you started learning a lot about these people and their background, the way they grew up, and then started noticing the things that they had brought with them that were contributing and then exacerbating some of the current experiences that they were having.
What question I had too is one thing I've heard, I don't know if it's accurate, but like there's a lot of unfortunately a lot of suicide with veterans, and sometimes you think that it's veterans that have seen combat and been in combat, and it's not always the case. Many times it's they weren't shot at, they weren't in these combat situations all the time, but they're still committing suicide. Do you think in many cases it is because of the trauma they brought with them before they went in the military, and then maybe as they leave they lose that support group? I mean, is that true? Is it or I don't know, what is your, do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, I do work with military veterans. I don't work with active duty. I don't have access to that pool through their insurance. They have other therapies that they access. But I do work with veterans. Like I said, I'm a veteran myself.
Yeah.
In my experience, part of what you said is true.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with unresolved trauma for early on that exacerbates their experiences of the things they might have gone through. So the question would be, is like, how is it that somebody that wasn't in combat, that didn't see death and dismemberment and all these other horrific things that come with war, how is it that these soldiers, these veterans, are also taking their life at a similar rate as combat veterans? And it has to do with the fact that sometimes I hit a rewind to myself. I hear myself speaking. Yeah. What I consider a fact right, in my opinion, is that viewing somebody's life story and understanding their trauma is not a thing that we do very well.
Hmm.
A lot of the experiences that you would look at if somebody was telling you, "Oh, this happened to me as a child," and then maybe it's shifting now.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it is, but for the most part, people will look at it and be like, stop whining. It's like that old school mentality.
Yeah.
Pull up your bootstraps, tie them up, and keep going.
Yeah.
But what we know now is that that is not the case. And so the reason I bring this up is because we've ignored all these things for a very long time. If you're sitting in school as a child and your teacher, stands you up in the middle of the class, third grade, and openly ridicules you and makes fun of you and encourages the other children to laugh at you for something that you did or the way that you look.
Yeah.
That's a trauma.
Yeah.
So it's a trauma within the context of that child's life experience.
Yeah.
In that moment, the way that is happening to that child, it's a trauma experience.
Yeah.
Right? That's one.
Okay.
Probably not the first one.
Yeah.
But it's one experience, right? Then compounded by multiple experiences and maybe other really overt trauma experiences.
Yeah.
Physical abuse, sexual abuse, death, of a family member, all these different things, but they compound. There is actually a measure that is being used, and I think it's an amazing way to understand just how things impact us. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, ACEs. And also something you can Google. Just Google ACEs trauma, and you'll get a lot of information on that.
Yeah.
But the more adverse childhood experiences that you have, the higher the possibility, for instance, of anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders is in adulthood.
Wow.
So we cannot ignore that. We cannot ignore, like these veterans that you're asking about.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot ignore that they probably come into this career field already with a lot of trauma in their life. And mental health, and I can tell you from me being in the military and experiencing a trauma experience in death of a friend of mine.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And a near-death experience for me.
Yeah.
I had zero access to mental health.
Yeah.
They actually sent me, when I started expressing some of the not suicidal ideation, but some of the hopelessness that I was expressing, and sort of despair that I felt after the trauma event, they sent me to a priest. I wasn't Catholic.
Yeah.
I grew up Protestant in Mexico, which is a whole other conversation.
Right.
But they sent me to a priest.
Yeah.
A priest who was trained in mental health. Who, when I spoke with him, he tried some hypnosis and then sent me on my way.
Wow.
One session.
Wow.
So
that was it. Yeah. So here's some ibuprofen.
Back to your unit.
Wow.
From that point on, I didn't speak to anyone about what I was experiencing.
Wow.
I didn't for years. It took me years, and then that's another part of what led me into this field. Yeah. But it took me years to talk to anybody openly about what I was experiencing. Yeah. Right. But you take that experience, which is a very overt, traumatic experience, and then you add my other childhood experiences that I had.
What are your thoughts on hypnosis?
There's a lot of research out there that speaks to the positive effects of suggestibility. Yeah. I've never worked with hypnosis, so I can't discount it as something that can work for some people. I don't know enough of it about it to tell people not to try it. Yeah. But if we're talking about suggestibility and the ability to put somebody in a state where they're more open to receiving certain things, I would say there can be a benefit to that. I mean, if you look at the methods that we use in therapy that are not hypnosis, they work a lot with cognition, right? Okay. Perception. Right. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, I love that model, and it's not the only model I use, because I don't, in the work that I do, in my opinion, in my experience, it's not the end all be all of change. It can help with change, but it has this one thing that's incredibly simple, and it's this triangle. It's just a triangle, right? And it's a connection between thoughts, feelings, and actions, right? When I started working with a client using the CBT model, we started learning their relationship with their thoughts, feelings, and actions, right? And that's just the beginning. You know, tell me the last time that this happened where you acted out of anger. Let's see that relationship in that action, and not saying that once they understand that, then they're like, oh, that's what I need to change, right? Because then we can, once they understand that there is a relationship there, right? We can start talking about what came up for you that led you to act out of the emotion of anger and do and say the things that you did that then led to consequences, right? If you follow that track, eventually you're going to get to working on the trauma bond that they have, right? With their traumatic experiences. That's where EMDR comes in. When you're working with the very sort of like animalistic part of yourself, right? The way things have gotten ingrained into your nervous system that tell you that something is not right, that you're in danger. And not physically. We don't live in caves anymore. We're not hunting lions or dinosaurs. That's not that type of danger, but the body still reacts in that way. When people talk to us a certain way, when there's a certain tone of voice, there's a process that happens. You feel it in your body. If you pay attention to your body, will tell you that something's not right. But then the mind wants to catch up, and the mind wants to explain and put labels on why this reaction is happening. What do we have? We have a bank of experiences, right? That more than likely have been negative, that are feeding the negative thought process and narrative sort of feeds this idea that these things are happening because of this.
You know, we've talked about this before, how perception leads action.
Yes.
And there's a term, and we like I said, we've had this conversation, we've talked about, is the term of white privilege. And how white privilege, the term can have a very negative effect on people, because if you do believe, if your perception is that all white people have a certain level of perception over you, and there may be at times that may be true. I don't know, but overall, if you feel like that's always true in your daily life, that then your actions are going to be different. If you believe, as opposed to if you believe that your success is based upon your actions and not because there's a white person holding you down, you're going to move differently in society.
Yes.
Do you find that people have to change their perception a lot? And how difficult is that for people to change their perception?
I would say it's incredibly challenging because of the variety of life experiences. Now, this is an incredibly touchy subject because it calls into at times when people feel is like questioning the way they experience life as a minority, as a person of color. I mean, we look at the BIPOC population, and I could sit in a conversation in a group setting where the majority of the group would not agree with me of what my views are about white privilege. And you and I have talked a lot. And also, it's not. This is the thing. When I make the statement, we need to really work on our views about white privilege. People have told me this, and this is after we've had conversations, and they very openly have come and talked to me. Is that as soon as you said that, my thought was, Augustine is pro-white. Augustine is saying that white people historically have not wronged other people.
Right, they hear that.
Automatically, what that does, and that's one example of just how we listen sometimes. Automatically, what that does, it blocks out a lot of other parts of the process of actually active listening to what I want to share. And I'm not making these things as statements of fact. It's the statements that I make are based on my life experience. What I've seen, how I've been treated by not only the Hispanic, Latino, Mexican population, white people, black people. I have a wide range of experience in sort of weaving in and out of these different, cultural presentations. So before I get too far away from it, they stopped listening to the idea of what it would be like to stop vilifying white people for the experience. Now, and this is where it connects to the other things that we've talked about, right? But this is change that needs to happen globally. Right. It begins with conversations like this, and then it begins with connecting to groups that actively can do things within the community and society. But the one thing you can't take away is it begins with yourself and wanting to do something different, right? This is where my idea, and I'm going to take you back to high school, but this is not where the idea was born. In thinking back, these are the things that solidified for me that I needed to change my view of white people. I had a lot of opportunities through high school, right? People hear that, and as soon as they say that, but you're also Mexican and you were struggling with other things, and because you weren't accepted, and then that affected the way maybe you weren't having breakfast, and you malnutrition and showing up to school late and tired. And yes, we can go there. Yes, we can go there. But me, as a person doing that self-analysis that I was talking to you about, I know that all these things had an effect. I'm a therapist, so I look at it from this lens also. I know that these things had an effect, but I also know that I had a lot of opportunities that I chose not to take because I chose to do the other things. Now, this goes into the cost-benefit analysis. I was getting a lot of benefit of doing a lot of shady things. I was. To me, it's representative, and this is. I think if I am this way, and this is the way that these things happen to me. How many more people that are similar, not just like me, but have similarities to this experience are there out there in the millions and billions of people out in the world right now? When I decided to follow the military track, and my recruiter told me that you cannot join, and this is your timeline, if you don't have a high school diploma, something clicked. I know we went in a different direction at that point of the conversation, but something clicked where I stopped doing a lot of the things that I was doing. I stopped ditching. I went and I talked to my academic counselor. I asked him, what do I need to do to graduate? And I actually, within like a third of the time that I should have taken me to do this, I completed. I had to take tests. I completed all my credits for graduation, and I was actually able to walk. Okay, so what led to that being a possibility? I mean, for years, from very early on in my academic sort of experience, I had been told that I was not intelligent enough, smart enough, you'll never amount to anything. But here comes this moment where the prize that I had in front of me was something that I was seeing this as, this is what I need to have in my life right now, because I don't see myself existing any other way. Now, I'm not going to college. I certainly told myself, I'm not going to college. I'm hanging around with a lot of bad people. I'm doing a lot of bad things. If I have more time on my hands,
it's probably gonna get worse.
So I need to get out of here. And this is my way to get out of here. I was able to complete the work that I've been telling myself. Something clicked in my brain. A part of me, and that's work that I do also has to do with parts of self. The part of me that at times felt capable, that felt connected to understanding academics and math and English and all these different things. That part came up. Whoever was driving the bus at that time yanked him off that seat, got behind the wheel, and started driving. And I started doing the things that I needed to do to get out of there. Right? So that means that the capability was there. Right? And to me, it also means that even though my connection to building relationships with white people at the time, and the view that I had about speaking like a white person, looking at in trouble, all those ideas that I had, those are the things that held me back. were they contributors? Where was my teacher, Miss Bonnie? I loved her, but very like old school mentality.
Yeah.
Sort of backhanded compliments and demeaning statements about Mexicans. And this is the interesting thing. She was a kind person, and she said things in a well-meaning way.
Yeah.
And I can reflect on that now. And people will say, "Well, how do you know that? How do you know that she wasn't a racist?" Something. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just know that my experience at that time with her is she truly was trying to help me. I don't know. I say this in the best way that she could, or she knew how, right? But I don't know. I could sit here and blame her for the way she spoke to me, and then I can then say, because she talked to me that way, pushed me away from learning.
Yeah.
Or I could say, now that I recognize that there were a lot of things that I ended up doing were always things that were within me.
Yeah.
Are there things that limit you? Yes. Are there things but the biggest thing that limits is the views you have.
Yeah.
So if your idea is that we're being held down because white people are holding us down because they control the majority of the funds and the money,
Mm-hmm.
I would say do more research.
Yeah.
And really look at how you're living and existing, and really self-assessment.
Yeah.
See what part in your life that is actually playing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you take a young group of Mexican kids or Latino Hispanic kids or Black kids, and you educate them using the principles of leadership to be strong leaders and not fight against,
Mm-hmm.
but exist within the system. Eventually, the mindset that they'll have will create the change that they want to be, and then they can expand that out. Right. So it's another thing that is not looked upon kindly, at least not the way I grew up, is integrating yourself into white America.
Yeah.
Well, how much time do we have left?
We can go as long as you want, but yeah.
How much time do we have left? Because this is another thing. What it is to be an American is like a big challenge for immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, because that's the thing, everybody's customs are a little bit different, from where you come from. Even, people from the South are different from people from Seattle. People from New York are different from people from San Diego and LA. So even within America, we have our own little subcultures. I mean, Mexicans from California are a little bit different from Mexicans from Texas,
Oh yeah.
I
I lived in Texas for 3 years.
Yeah. So, but I think to me, if I ever had to say, what makes an American has to do more with your love of freedom. That to me is like it's values that regardless of how you celebrate over winter break, how you do your rituals and customs, that's something you brought here. Pretty much everybody came here. You brought those with you. There are certain kind of American things that we have, high school football, racing cars, those type of things. But for the most part, I think the values, and this is my personal opinion, is what separates us from Americans, from the Chinese and other parts of the world are we value freedom and we value liberty. And that's and so I don't care if you're from Alabama or California or Montana, the one thing we have in common is our love for freedom and liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can, rest in that, I think that's a starting point at the very least.
Well, I would agree with that. I would agree that it's the starting point. We're not the only democratic country in the world.
Right.
There are other countries have very
Similar.
strong democratic process that also speak about freedom and liberties. I've lived in some of those countries. I've experienced some in life outside of the United States. In my opinion, this is a country where those things are more readily accessible to us to be able to be successful, right? But if the perception is that our hands are tied off, and this is, again, I think why I said earlier that it's a really tricky subject in the conversation to have is because we're not talking about the process and the mechanisms in place of people that exist in this country that do try to manipulate outcomes, and they do hold the majority of the wealth, and there's a long laundry list. See, by me saying that this is a country that has the most accessibility for success, that is not saying that I don't understand that those other things are happening.
Yeah.
Because they are happening.
Yeah.
Right. But if the mindset and the perception is such that that is what's limiting your success as a human being, and that's what keeps you trapped in that one space that you're in, right? We talk about radical acceptance, where if you're saying this is who I am, this is what my life is, that's not radical acceptance. That's just you negatively speaking to yourself about your life. And listen, there's a spectrum here. So also people listening know that I'm not thinking like, just espouse these ideas and change will come for everybody. I understand that we're all different, right? But the radical acceptance piece is that this is what's happening in my world. I don't like it. Mm-hmm. I'm uncomfortable. To me, the definition of freedom and liberty is this. What steps can I take to get closer to that? Nice. And you have to begin. You have to begin somewhere, right? And I think working with the self is always the best. Expecting things to change based on actions from other people will always put you on the bad side of things. Yeah, right.
Sure. You know, one thing I wanted to talk to is there seems to be this bumper sticker. You had talked about it when people hear a term, they hear you say something, they automatically think, okay, this guy's disregarding this, blah, blah, like just because they heard this.
Yes.
And we've kind of become a nation of bumper stickers. But, you know, we like to hear a bumper sticker. Slogans, you know, and without really taking the extra 5 minutes to understand what the person is saying. We take their first sentence and we run with it.
Right. I see that happen often. You're right, it does. Yeah. And I'm not going to say everybody's like that, but it happens often enough. And within families, within friendships, certainly outside in the community, when you hear people speak towards something they're passionate about, where social media is rife with this. We're so ready to attack and vilify people. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And everybody has a voice on social media now. So
for better or worse. Yeah. For better or worse. I think the process of communication and understanding communication, we communicate in very many different ways. Not just in words, body language, attitude. Mm-hmm. But the process of understanding communication and the big part of as the active listening part of communication, a lot of us are, I think, lost to that idea. Either we don't know that that's a thing, or we know that it's a thing. But again, whatever is happening in our life is driving us to not want to listen to the other person's opinion, and really being stuck with our own ideals. I mean, all of these things that I'm talking about. I mean, I'm certainly, hopefully, people are getting the idea that I'm coming here as an expert of all these things. I'm an ever-changing, evolving individual. I understand that learning, at least to me, it's a process that happens throughout your lifetime. Yeah. And you never stop learning. I might run into somebody that has a great argument and has a great knowledge base about things that I feel strongly about that might sway me in that direction. And that's not mean that they're changing my mind. Yeah. Just to me, it means that I have new information and there's new learning, and it's leading me on a path. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you, if there's somebody listening right now and they're thinking about, they want to get involved in therapy, and when I mean they actually want to pursue be a therapist, they want to as a career. Mm-hmm. How does somebody go about doing that? Like if they're like, man, I want to be a therapist one day. How do you do that? Oh, it's a process. It's a process. You have to go to school. Your bachelor's can be in any discipline. My recommendation is if you're passionate about the work, have your bachelor's to be in something you would like to call. My bachelor's is in psychology. Yeah. I have a minor in criminal justice. That was the direction that I was going in for some time. Again, the idea was that I liked psychology and I liked the concept of mental health, but I didn't feel like I could operate in that world,
Yeah.
but I felt criminal justice was something that I could do.
Mhm.
But in that process and doing some of the work, doing research on writing papers about serial killers, for example, you know, and then reading about their lives, it took me back to some of those things that I shared earlier about reflecting on my own life and my own trauma and the way that I grew up. And then seeing the similarities between how they spoke about their upbringing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, hey, well, the stuff that I was thinking about before that had to do with family dynamics within the context of how you exist in them, there's something to this. Like, I want to understand that better.
Yeah.
So that's what led me to starting my sort of like my road to then, you know, being in a master's program to be a marriage and family therapist.
Right.
I wanted to understand family dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly I started from wanting to understand my family first.
Yeah.
Right, and then just generalized wanting to help other people understand it as well. I would say to do a bachelor's in a related field to mental health. As soon as you're able and willing, I say go straight into a master's program. You're going to need those things to get licensure.
And then after you get your master's, you have to get a license. Like, do you test for that? How does that work?
So within the master's program now, there's programs that are master's doctorate programs, right? Well, let's stick with the master's. When you're in your master's program, there's going to be a portion of that dedicated to putting in hours as a therapist. And the easiest places to do that is county funded programs, right? This is the practicum part of your master's program.
Okay.
And I was an assistant director and program director for a children's program, and we would go out into the colleges and we would recruit practicum students, and we would mentor develop.
Yeah.
Right, and they have to do anywhere from 500 plus hours of unpaid work.
Wow.
Just to learn the craft.
Yeah.
Of being able to be present for people.
Yeah.
So once you do that, you complete your master's, then you have to get a license to be an associate. And as an associate, you need to now get 3,000 hours of supervised work. So there are checks and balances. And some people out there that are listening might be like, well, I had a horrible experience with my therapist that didn't seem to know what they were doing. Yeah. On behalf of the field and the therapists, like myself, I consider myself incredibly dedicated to this work.
Yeah.
I apologize for that experience, but don't let that deter you.
Yeah.
There are checks and balances.
Yeah.
I mean, I was fortunate enough to be a mentor and a trainer, a clinical supervisor for practicum students and associates, getting their hours. And once you finish your 3,000 supervised hours, you have to go to supervision every single week.
Wow.
Right? And have somebody look over your work.
Yeah.
Then you have to sit an exam. It's a 2-part exam, and you have to pass both parts before you license. Yeah. And you're able to be on your own, actually providing therapy services in private practice, or another agency if you choose to go to an agency.
Wow. Well, Agustin, I appreciate you coming out. I know in the description, you're going to be able to find some information if you are interested in reaching out to Agustin.
I will provide a couple of links that I have.
Okay.
If people want to reach out to me specifically.
Perfect. Anything you want to leave with?
Yes.
Okay.
And since this is the focus is mental health, I will go back to something that we talked about earlier. Think about your mental health the way you do about your physical health. Now, if you're neglecting your physical health, but you know that you are, I understand that also. There's this concept in therapy that if therapists out there that might be listening to this do not speak to, they should. It's the mind-body connection. There is this relationship with our mind and our body, right? The mind is part of our body. The brain, the way that we feed ourselves affects the way the brain works. lives. So all these things are related. We're all connected. It's not like this separate thing, like from the neck down, everything stops.
Yeah.
You know, we can ignore whatever's happening because that's what we look at. What's happening in your mind.
Yeah.
I leave you with this. Do not ignore the health aspect of having a sound mind. And this is not, there are people out there that are suffering from diagnosable, mental disorders, and, psychosis and, different DSM-5 diagnosable, categories that we can go through, but that's not the purpose of living this. The idea is that if you are struggling with the way that you are living your life, if your functioning is being affected by the things that you're experiencing in your life, that's a sign that something is happening with your mental health. The health with your mind and how it's working and how it's processing things, it's compromised. Just the way physical ailment from the neck down, we look at clinical things that which is strange people separate in that way still to this day, is you would go take care of it. You would go to a doctor, you would make an appointment. Most of us would. A lot of us also ignore our physical health. I think we're at a point where there is more access to mental health. There are a lot of platforms out there that provide it via telehealth, which is also part of the work that I do. I'm not going to say that there is no excuse to not reach out, because this is it. I understand. So my understanding of the human condition and how frail we are sometimes, especially when seeking help.
Yeah.
I've been there myself.
Yeah.
I have been there myself. I know the challenges. Yes, there are tons of excuses. Whether they're valid or not, we won't even get into that. But I understand that you might be sitting there telling yourself all the reasons why you're not reaching out to speak to someone about your mental health. And like the blinders are getting closer and closer and closer, narrow and narrow, your scope is changing. And right out here, right in the periphery, is at least one reason why you should. I would say take a step back, right? See the needs that you have and grab onto that. Reach out, talk to someone.
Yeah.
It can be incredibly helpful to help you what you're struggling with.
Yeah. Agustin, man, love you, brother. Thank you so much for coming out. And like I said, if you're interested in reaching out to Agustin, I'll put some links in the description. Also, feel free to reach out directly to me. Agustin's a personal friend of mine, so I can link you guys up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
And
being here.
See you next time.